Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I can see that we've got quite a number of people have now joined us, so I think we're ready to start this afternoon's session on the exciting day that we've actually signed our agreement with EASA this morning. So I think it's a good news story today, and you're going to hear more around that this afternoon from my colleagues. But good afternoon to everybody. So yes, today marks a significant step as we place new foundations of our future working relationships with our colleagues from EASA, who are also on the line this afternoon, and building on those relationships that we previously held between the CAA and our colleagues in Cologne. First, secondly, I really must say a huge thank you again to all those individuals that have been specifically involved in bringing this agreement together in such an expedient manner. This has been kind of, a very short period since we finalized the trade agreement and actually put this tip in place. And I think it's to the benefit of all of us, going forward. So I'd like to thank all of those that have been involved, both in EASA and within the UK CAA. Without their work, we wouldn't be here today, and we wouldn't have this vehicle that would allow our industry to function as we go forward safely and efficiently, especially in the challenging times that we're facing today, with our response from the global pandemic. We must also recognise that this is a starting point. There will be probably many of you that look at this afternoon and say, oh, that isn't perfect from my perspective. That isn't perfect from, from a business perspective. But we have to remember that we are, building on these foundations now, and that this is a starting point, and we will build on this agreement as we go forward. And you'll hear more about that as well from colleagues as we talk about that throughout the afternoon. So the purpose of this afternoon is that you will hear from the team that's brought this agreement together. So you'll hear from the people that have written this agreement. So you will hear from the people that have been closest to it and their understanding and their reasoning behind why it is written like it is written. I'm sure they'll explain to you in detail the procedures relating to certification, to production, and the processes for bringing products to market, but also, more importantly, maintaining the safety of those that are in the market. I think, and that is a real key for me as well. It's not about just those bringing products to market, it's about maintaining those that are in the market. I hope this will set the scene for you to understand the processes and the expectations as we move forward. So if you have questions as you go through this afternoon, please do not be afraid to ask those that are involved and presenting on the key subjects. So you're going to hear now, I'm going to hand over very shortly to our chair, who's going to give you a pre-recorded message. And also you'll hear from the Executive Director of the EASA, Patrick Key, as well, on the significance of today and the signing of the agreement. Then you'll hear from our policy and legal teams. You'll hear from our certification experts, and you'll hear from our production experts, and you'll also hear have the ability at the end of the day for a question and answer session with Liam Betts, our design and certification manager. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Sir Stephen and his pre-recorded message on the importance of the agreement today, and then you'll hear from Patrick Key.
Good afternoon and welcome to this session at the CAA EASA Technical Implementation Procedures webinar. Earlier today, the CAA and EASA signed the Technical Implementation Procedure, the TIP, signalling again the vital importance of a continued close working relationship between our two organisations, now that the UK has left the European regulatory system. I want to thank sincerely colleagues at EASA and at the CAA for their commitment, professionalism and hard work which has got us to this point, helping provide the greater clarity that the aerospace enterprise has been eagerly anticipating. It's always been a priority for the CAA to help business transition and easily adjust to the new regulatory framework creating as much stability as possible. From taking steps to ensure all certificates, approvals and licenses that were in effect on the 31st of December and issued in accordance with the EASA requirements remained valid, to rigorously maintaining aviation safety and security standards. The tip now sets out the processes for organisations to follow in the design and production of new aerospace parts, which move between the UK and the EU systems. It confirms again that while the UK is no longer in EASA, we know the value of retaining close collaboration with our European partners, working together in common interest to maintain the highest standards of aviation safety. This session is designed to provide you with information you will need to understand the requirements and access the benefits of the trade deal. It will include details about the impact on export certificates, the administration of design certificates, technical assistance, and information for certification activities. My CAA colleagues, who have been working very closely on this negotiation over the past few months, stand ready to answer your questions. Finally, I do understand that questions will remain about future negotiations for further annexes to the Aviation Safety Agreement, particularly with regards to maintenance organisations. While the potential to agree these is included in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, whether and when such negotiations might start is a matter for the UK Government and the EU Commission, rather than the CAA itself. We will, of course, continue to work closely with Government as it negotiates any future terms with the EU on aviation issues. We don't yet have an indication of timescales, but the Government has already confirmed that it hopes to discuss this with the EU as soon as practicable. So welcome again to this session. I'm delighted with this further demonstration of the close work that's being done between the CAA and EASA, as together we support our shared goals of progressing the aviation enterprise whilst promoting the highest standards of aviation safety.
On behalf of EASA, I would like to welcome you to this information session on the technical implementation procedures for airworthiness and environmental certification between EASA and the UK CAA. The UK CAA is a long-established and trusted partner of EASA. We are now at the start of a new type of relationship, and I am certain that it will be a fruitful cooperation and partnership. The TIP have been designed to organize this relationship and give certainty to industry on what to expect from this cooperation. We are looking forward to continuing the cooperation with our UK CAA colleagues to implement the TIP for the benefit of aviation safety.
So hopefully, Julia, we're able to run the Sir Stephen intro now, if possible, please.
Okay, just bear with me, please.
That's better, thank you. I think there's something happening there. Still not playing, Julia, sorry.
I think it might be a good idea if we just
yeah, I think we might have to
move on.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not, because the video and the sound is both playing and sharing for me. So until I can figure out why this is not translating.
Okay.
Don't worry.
Yeah,
okay.
If not, we'll definitely make it available on our website alongside this webinar.
Okay, no problems, Julia. So without further ado then, Neil, Chris, I'm going to hand over to you, if that's possible. And introduce my colleagues, Neil Williams and Chris Street from our legal department. So over to you, Neil. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dave, and hopefully our slides will run more smoothly. I just introduced myself. I'm Neil Williams. I'm the Safety Policy Manager at the CAA, and I was leading the team that worked on the development of both the Aviation Safety Agreement with the EU and subsequently all the implementation procedures under the TIP. And without the help of my good colleague Chris Street from our legal department, we wouldn't have been able to get all this together. So hopefully between the two of us in the next 5 minutes or so, we'll just take you through the high level overview of the TIP and how it fits together with the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. I'm going to hand over to Chris.
Thank you, Neil. I'm hoping you can all hear me, and I assume you can, unless I'm told otherwise. If we go to the next slide, if that's possible, please, you will see what I've done here is a diagram which broadly outlines, broadly outlines how the Trade and Cooperation Agreement is structured. So you'll see roughly on the top, you've got the sort of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement is divided into parts, and each the point about this diagram I'm hoping to get through is each is they're very much interconnected with one another. So for example, the part on transport and Title I, aviation transport, you will notice that there are elements of that title which refer to things like competition, because obviously transport and aviation transport competition is covered in the particular section on competition. So the part I want to draw your attention to is obviously Title II, aviation safety. That provides for annexes in aviation safety area, of which there is currently one, that is Annex 30, airworthiness and environmental certification. And today we are introducing to you the technical implementation procedures, which effectively give meaning to that annex, which gives meaning to the overarching aviation safety chapter. Obviously, this TIP is just one part of the agreement, and there are many more features and many more to come, or at least we hope. If you please put us on to the next slide, I'd be grateful. Okay, so I've just briefly gone over what a bilateral aviation safety agreement is here. I'm not going to read it out. You can read that for yourselves. It is the important thing that I want to home in on, though, is the distinction between an agreement and an arrangement, or MOU. And some of you will know that we have agreements / arrangements with other countries in the world, and some of them are what we call arrangements or MOUs, and some of them are agreements. The distinction here is in the first bullet point. The agreement allows a sort of a derogation from domestic laws, whereas an arrangement is a form of cooperation that doesn't create a distinct legal basis. Those do not. So in many respects, going for a full agreement is a better solution for the aviation industry. If you please, I would like to move on to the next slide. So here, as I have alluded to before, the BASA supersedes any agreement in existence between member states and the UK in areas which are covered by the BASA. So as you are aware, or will become shortly aware, in this instance, we only have this annex. This annex covers airworthiness, environmental testing, design and production organizations. We have a hope that we will be able to expand this area of cooperation in the future. This may depend on a number of factors which we would be outside of the scope of this particular presentation. If we would like to move on to the next slide, I'd be grateful. Thank you. So here, all I'm intending to do is outline a rough structure so you know where to dip in and out, whichever relevant areas you want to go to. So section 1 is your outlines what the TIP's purpose is and adds some administration parts. If you are interested in validation, I would hone in on section 2, That's full validation in particular is outlined, the process is outlined in page 28. I would hone in on section 3 if we were talking about communication on safe conditions for obviously administration of design certificates, and 5, 7 are interrelated, as I've said, and section 6 for requirements for exports and imports. Some of this will be more relevant to the CAA and some of it will be more relevant to businesses, but I think most of you will be interested in sections 2 and to some extent 5. There it is. If you would kindly move on to the next slide. And here I am actually just going to sort of hand over to my good colleague Neil and ask him to take you through the Certification Oversight Board.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. So within the structure of the arrangement, there is something called the Certification Oversight Board, which is a process that's it's a board that's established in accordance with the Aviation Safety Annex in our case, but you'll see this kind of structure exists in most of the bilateral arrangements that the EU has entered into. The board's a technical coordination body that's responsible for the effective implementation of the annex. So it's really there to ensure that any issues that develop between the two parties or clarification that needs to be sought or changes to the implementation procedures have a proper, there's a proper board where those discussions can be held. It's a mechanism for resolving any difficulties in the implementation of the arrangement. And it has an obligation to the Specialised Committee on Aviation Safety, which is an overarching committee that covers the aviation safety aspects. And I just need to explain a couple of things about the board. The board is comprised of technical agents from both the CAA and EASA. The board at the moment is co-chaired by Rachel Dashler on the EASA side and Dave Malins, who you've already heard speak today on CA side, and is supported by others at the moment who have been involved in establishing this arrangement. One of the important things to understand about this whole structure is Certification Oversight Board is only charged with implementing the annex as it stands today. So as we go through and you see my colleagues talk, we'll be talking about how we've implemented the Aviation Safety Annex. So really the TIP can't actually go further in terms of its scope or the level of acceptance than the things that are agreed in the annex. The Certification Oversight Board within itself can't actually change the annex. It can change the implementation procedures, but it can only make a recommendation up to the Specialised Committee on changing the annex, or in the case of additional annexes, that again is something that's in the realm and control of the Specialised Committee. At this point in time, the Specialised Committees on all the different subjects haven't been formed by our government and our colleagues in the EU. And so many of you might want to ask us questions later about when will there be further annexes. That's quite a difficult question to answer at the moment because the Specialised Committees haven't been formed and there haven't even been initial discussions on those matters as yet. So I think we've covered the basic structure of the arrangement, and now I'm going to hand over to my colleagues Mark Bonnick and Dominic Cortizo, who's going to talk about the actual approval procedures for design certificates. So now we're kind of moving into the meat of the arrangements that the TIP now provides a route for getting designs validated in the EU and for EU designs to be validated or accepted in the UK. If we could just move on a couple of slides, please. Okay, so Dominic, Mark, it's all yours.
Okay, trying to put my video on. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Mark Bonnick. I'm one of the Principal Design and Certification Specialists in the newly re-established Design and Certification Department within CAA. And I'm going to be joined a little bit later on in this particular section by my colleague Dominic Cortizo. I'm sure a lot of you will know Dominic, but he'll introduce himself a little bit later. Next slide, please. And again, thank you. So what am I going to, whoops, back one, please. Thank you. So what am I going to cover? So we're going to look at the principles of the TIP and validation. We're going to have a look at the criteria for acceptance, the 2 available streams of validation, which will be in streamlined, and a technical validation, which is that in line with level of involvement principles. And then we'll have a look at a summary of acceptance and validations, which is the table that Chris advertised on page 28. And when he refers to page 28, he means slide 28 of this pack rather than page 28 of the TIP. Then I'm going to be joined by Dominic, who will go through the application process, and we'll look at the application process in both directions. So that's applications to EASA for EASA validation of CAA certified designs, and applications in the other direction to CAA for the validation of designs approved in the European Union in the EASA system. Against each of those items, you'll see I've got numbers. We've got 2.1 against principles, 2.2 against acceptance, for example. And that's there to correlate with the paragraph numbers that are within the TIP. So if you're going to use these slides as a future reference, as a quick guide through the TIP, I'm hoping those chapter and paragraph references will be useful. And I'm going to use those throughout the forthcoming slides. Next slide, please. So paragraph 2.1 describes the principles of involvement for validation, and it's pretty much like all the other TIPs and bilaterals that we have in place with other aviation authorities. And the principle is that it's based on the maximum extent practicable on the technical evaluations, tests, inspections, and work that's done by the certificating authority. Okay, so the level of involvement of the validation authority is limited somewhat to respect the principles and the assurance is gained in the certificating authority. So the sort of things that are considered are those that we've got listed there. So it's the experience of the CA, of the certificating authority, the overall experience gained by the validating authority during previous projects, how it's learned how the certificating authority behaves, the nature and the complexity of the design to be validated, the performance and experience of the applicant with the validating authority, and the continued mutual confidence between the CA and the EASA. Those middle bullet points will be familiar to those DOAs that have been working for the last year or so on the level of involvement principles out of Part 21. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first stream under the TIP is that of acceptance. So like most other TIPs and IPAs, this is the case where the work from the certificating authority is directly accepted by the validating authority with no further work. So the 3 elements here apply. There is no application to the validating authority. There is no assessment by the validating authority, and there is no validating certificate issued by the validating authority. There are a couple of exceptions, as you will see on the slide there. There are cases, perhaps, when a design that is accepted under this TIP will need some administrative updates to the certificate, and we'll go through some examples of those a little bit later. So, in summary, EASA will accept, coming out of the CA system, minor changes. So that's minor changes to products, so at the aircraft, engine, propeller level, and to TSO aid articles, so that minor changes that are done in accordance with 21A611. They're accepted. No application, no assessment, no certificate. Also accepted is design data for minor repairs that have been approved in the CA system. Next slide, please. Now, in the other direction, you will notice it's not entirely equal. However, this is, as Neil said, this is entirely in keeping with what was agreed in the agreement. Okay, so the TIP supports that entirely. So what will a CA accept coming out of the EASA system? Minor changes to products, aircraft engines, propellers, and to TSO aid articles. Design data for minor and major repairs. Okay. Non-significant STCs are major changes, and non-significant carries with it the exact same definition that DOAs will be familiar with in Part 21A 101, the change product rule. So the same determination of significant and not significant applies here. Okay, so those non-significant changes approved in the EASA system are accepted. If there is a change that's required to the validating type certificate data sheet, then there will be an administrative process available to the applicant, okay, and the CAA would have to be advised if its certification basis has been modified due to those elements noted there, things like novel and unusual features, unconventional product use, potential development of an unsafe condition, or the use of ESFs or a deviation, in which case the acceptance will have to be supplemented by that administrative application. CAA will also accept ETSOs coming out of the EASA system. Next slide, please. Okay, beyond acceptance, we're now into the realms of validation. And for validation, there are two paths available. Okay, there's streamlined and there's a technical, which the tip refers to as being in line with level of involvement principles. But for me, it's much easier for me to say the word technical than it is to keep repeating level of involvement principles. So I'm going to be talking in the next few slides about technical validation versus streamlined validation. So what's eligible for streamlined? So the paragraph numbers you can see there, 2.3.1 describes that, and they are the CAA validation of EASA significant STCs and major changes, and EASA's validation of CAA STCs, major changes, major repairs, and TSOAs when agreed on a case-by-case basis. It's important to recognize the underlined item there, when agreed on a case-by-case basis. The inference being there that generally those items are subject to a technical validation. Paragraph 2.3.2 then describes those cases that are definitely subject to a technical validation in line with the level of involvement principles, and that's the last time I'll say that. And they are the CAA and EASA validation of type certificates and restricted type certificates. And then in the other direction, EASA validation of CAA STCs, major changes, major repairs, and TSOAs, unless agreed on a case-by-case basis that a streamlined process could apply. Okay, next slide. So the procedures for validation, continuing in paragraph 2.4 of the tip, they're pretty much the same, whether it's streamlined or technical validation. You need an application to be made to the validating authority via the certificating authority. That's the bit that Dominic will talk you through a little bit later. On receipt of the application, the certificating, well, before sending that application, the certificating authority will confirm A, that the project is in scope of the agreement, that they've actually issued or are about to issue a design certificate or plan to issue a design certificate, that the streamlined or technical process is actually applicable for that particular project type, and that a data pack has been applied, been compiled rather, which includes within it a statement of compliance with the validating authority's airworthiness and environmental requirements, and then it is being submitted. Okay. Further details of the data pack. The data packs are pretty similar to those that you would see within other tips and IPAs. And for a type certificate, for example, it might include a description of the product, detail any mandatory continuing airworthiness information, statements that the changes to correct unsafe conditions have been incorporated. It will list the approved manuals. Okay, and for STCs, we cover the same kind of things. It might also include things like airworthiness limitations, operating limitations for the AFM, and operational suitability data. Okay, further details of that data pack is in para 2.4.1.2. We now come to the first point in the tip that describes a timeline. Okay, so this first timeline quoted here in para 2.4.2 is where the validating authority should acknowledge the application and advise the certificating authority of any data that's missing within 20 working days of receipt. Okay, streamlined. Streamlined process means that an application is required. Okay, however, there is no technical assessment except for a technical familiarization, if that's necessary. And in these cases, a validation certificate is actually issued by the validating authority. Streamlined validations are sequential, sorry, my screen's just died on me. Streamlined validations are sequential only, unless there is an urgent operational need, in which case the applicant could follow the path of a technical validation procedure. However, appropriate level of involvement will be applied by the validating authority so that it will almost become a pseudo streamlined validation. They're on the cases of an urgent operational need. Okay. There is data required to allow a technical familiarization, and it's detailed in 2.4.1 if necessary. The technical familiarization needs to be completed within 20 working days. So here we have the second element of the timeline. So that's 20 working days of receipt of the pack, or the conclusion of any meetings that were necessary to develop that technical familiarization, because the technical familiarization could be more than just a desktop, although not typically for a streamlined validation. And then from that, the validating certificate is issued within 15 working days. So we've got a timeline on the previous slide of 20 working days. We have a further 20 working days here, and a validating certificate 15 working days beyond that. Next slide, please. So moving on, we went into technical validation. And in this case, again, a technical application is required. An application is required to the validating authority. A technical assessment is conducted this time by the validating authority. However, it follows the principles that were discussed earlier, and it's basically as per LOI, level of involvement procedures. And a validating certificate is issued by the validating authority. There is a provision within the TIP, so the validating authority could, under certain circumstances, and if it's appropriate to, decide to limit its involvement to just a review of the application. Okay, but generally the technical validation will follow the process that goes on to be described in para 2.4.4.4. Okay. These validations can be sequential or concurrent, as opposed to the sequential nature that is typical of the streamlined validation. Para 2.4.4.4 and subsequent paragraphs, as described on the screen there, shows the 4 phases of a technical validation process. So I'm trying to color code them. Stage 1 is the general familiarization, where there is basically the establishment of the validation authorities team. Okay, that follows an overview which is presented by the applicant. Move into the next stage, which is a bit more detailed, and it provides the technical familiarization for the validating authority. More provision of slightly more detailed technical information. The certification basis for the validating authority is established, and that certification basis is based on the validating authority's own standards. There needs to be a fair bit of coordination at this kind of stage between the CA, the VA, and the applicant, okay, just to make sure all parties understand the scope and the certification basis is established appropriately, okay. The applicant is required to present to the validating authority with support from the certificating authority as necessary to establish this technical familiarization. And it would normally include something like proposed VA certification basis, description of any novel features, any potential unsafe conditions, any deviations, special conditions, equivalent safety findings. Okay. Stage 3 is the determination of the VA's level of involvement. So how is that done? This is where the level of involvement principles come into play. And it's basically that the validating authority is to rely on the certificating authority to the maximum extent possible, okay? However, it's the validating authority's decision to ultimately decide the level of involvement. there are some validation items that could be retained by the validating authority. That is to say that those items, the compliance determination for compliance against some of those items would be by the validating authority and not necessarily by the certificating authority. Okay, we'll have a look on a forthcoming slide for some examples of what some of those validation items are. And then stage 4 is the compliance verification. So the validating authority satisfying itself that compliance is being determined. The certificating authority will confirm to the validating authority that the applicant has managed to demonstrate compliance with the validating authority's certification basis, and the validating authority issues the validating certificate. Next slide, please. Okay, so as part of all that stage 1 through 4 process, just a bit of color coding, just some extracts from those following paragraphs that may be applicable to and may impact the applicant. Much of these paragraphs describe the process between CAA and EASA, so that's the kind of process that may be running in parallel to what the applicant sees. But these are bits that you may be interested in that 24456 paragraph. So this is part of the general and technical familiarization process. The applicant is expected to present that overview to enable the validating authority to have enough information for it to establish its team and identify an appropriate certification basis. And for TC projects, this could also include a familiarization flight. The certification basis is going to be recorded in a CRE, and as you well know, that tends to be in CRE A1. The blue stuff related to the establishment of VIs and therefore the level of involvement, and the tip describes 2 groups of validation items. There's the generic ones, which are typically where there are significant standards differences between the 2 agencies and where there's development of new standards. And then there are project VIs, validation items, where the project introduces or affects new and novel technology, that there's an unconventional product use, there are unsafe conditions, equivalent safety findings, or new interpretations of means of compliance may be used. Next slide. Okay, further on in the blue, which was stage 3, the level of involvement in line with the principles of the tip is proportionate to the project's complexity and size. Okay, and that level of involvement for some projects will be communicated via the validation work plan, which is the responsibility of the validating authority to develop, and that will be discussed with the applicant, and if there's any change to it, any difference to the way the items will be retained by the validating authority as opposed to being the responsible certificating authority, that too will be communicated to the applicant. And then the prize is the stage 4. The certificate is issued once the certificating authority has issued its own certificate, never in advance of that. The applicant has been able to show and declare compliance with the validating authority certification basis. The certification authority has issued that statement of that compliance to the validating authority. All open issues have been closed, and of course, all the fees have been paid by the applicant. So that's it for the summary of acceptance, streamlined, and technical validation for terms of product level validation. And this slide in para 24414 then describes a process for EASA's validation, technical validation of the UK technical standard authorizations. As it says on the slide, I'm not going to read those out to you. There's an application pack. It includes the kind of things you would normally expect to see: certification program, qualification reports, software accomplishment summaries and plans, and hardware accomplishment summaries and plans, and outline and nameplate drawings, the sort of stuff you would normally submit for an ETSO authorization. Next slide, please. I've rattled through those different processes for acceptance, technical and streamlined validation and tried to identify what kind of projects that they were applicable to. If you're going to take away anything from this afternoon, I would suggest that this is one of the slides that you take away with it. And this is a summary which shows the sort of design approval down that left-hand column, minor change through to technical standard order. And then the 4 columns to the right then describe whether that project is a CAA validation of an EASA design approval or the EASA validation of a CAA design approval. And it describes the modality or the way in which that design is either validated or accepted. Okay, and in there are references back to the tip paragraphs that describe in detail where you need to go and establish the actual finer points and process details of how that validation is actually established. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Dominic.
Thank you very much, Mark. Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Dominic Cortizo. I'm also a Principal Design and Certification Specialist within our Design and Certification team. And I think we've been working quite well with a lot of you already. So I think you can see that there's been a lot of progress made since the last webinar that we gave you at the end of last year. So I'm here to talk to you about the application process, and I know a lot of you are itching to get your applications in for EASA validation, and I'm sure vice versa. So maybe we continue with the next slide, please. So everything's going to begin with yourselves applying to us CAA for EASA validations by using the EASA portal. I understand that many of you are already familiar with this, and many of you are obviously also registered to use it. For those of you who haven't used it before, then you'll need to register using the instructions that we've given you there, registering through portal@easa.europa.eu. So you log in a normal way and you complete the details for the project that you want to have validated within the EASA system. Next slide, please. And as a result of that, the portal will provide back to you an EASA form. We've already tested it with a UK DOA to prove that the system works, and thanks to them for helping us with that. And once the project has been lodged by yourselves, it will be identified as being pending within the EASA portal. Next slide, please. So the next step that you need to undertake is to complete the form SRG 1726NR that many of you have already been using, filling out field 4 to requesting a validation by EASA with the CAA supporting. And when you send in the application to us together with the supported data package, you'll need obviously to complete the fee payment details in accordance with our published fees and charges. So that comes into the CAA. Next slide, please. So we're now ready to process your applications, and for previous EASA projects that were transferred to the CAA that were in work before the end of last year, we have been completing a number of those. And we would ask that when you send in the application for those projects that were transferred to us for completion and that you still need EASA validation for, if you'd be kind enough to include the details of the EASA project number that you did have, as well as the new one that you will have received through the portal. So the old EASA project number, together, if you have it, the details of the EASA PCM or responsible party that you were dealing with. It's hoped then that when we submit the application on your behalf to EASA, that will find its way back to the person that was originally working on the project, and that will hopefully expedite the validation process by EASA. Next slide, please. So EASA will then, on receipt of the application made via the CAA, they'll perform an eligibility check on yourselves, and they'll change the application status once they're satisfied in the portal to being registered. Once the project application has been registered, then the applicant will receive an email with the EASA acceptance letter telling you that the task has been assigned and that the technical investigation will begin. And on the portal dashboard, again, many of you will be familiar with this, you'll see the name and contact details of the EASA PCM or responsible party for your project. Next slide, please. So here we have a summary of the application process for EASA validations. And again, like the summary chart that Mark put up at the end of his presentation, this will be a useful ready reckoner for you. And we understand that this will actually be published on the EASA website as well. The process is not new. It's one that's been worked with US, Canadian and Brazilian applicants for quite some time. So hopefully there'll be no problems in working in this way. We understand that EASA will be picking up projects from where they left off, and that's why giving us the EASA project number and the PCM details will enable us to progress your applications for validation as soon as possible. Okay, so that completes how you applied through the CAA for validations by EASA. Can we have the next slide, please? So if you're an EU design approval holder and you wish to apply for validation by CAA in accordance with the processes that Mark has kindly outlined previously, then you will fill out the form SRG 1726. This time you'll fill out field number 3. This will be completed by the EU applicant, and they will send in their data package through EASA, and it will be EASA who will forward the application on to us at apply@ca.co.uk. Next slide, please. And as Mark mentioned, within TIP section 2.2.1 acceptance, there is the provision for there to be administrative updates made of CAA type certificate data sheets, and we think type certificate data sheets for noise will also need to be updated from time to time. So we've developed a new form, SRG 1727, and that together with the supported data package could be supplied directly by the TC holder to the CAA, and we will receive that again with a nominal fee, and we will do the administrative update of the CA type certificate data sheet or type certificate data sheet for noise. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's the end of my part of the presentation, and we'll have questions and answers as per the agenda at the end of the sessions. So, shall I hand it back to our MC, please?
Okay, thank you, Dominic. So we're running a little bit ahead of schedule, so I think we try and broadly stick to the agenda, but so we have a 5-minute break now. So if we come back at just after 10:02, and then we move into the third session, which is on continuing airworthiness. Thank you. Bilateral agreements. There's always some element of recognition of the roles of state of design, state of manufacture, and state of registry, as these are terms established under ICAO Annex 8. Yeah, and there are certain functions that the authority responsible for discharging those responsibilities needs to be able to do. And in order to be able to do that, it needs to be clear who is the state of design, who is the state of manufacture, if they're different, and again, if they're the state of registry, what their responsibilities are too. So in order to do this within the TIP, we have section 3. So in line with ICAO norms, I would say the state of design under the TIP and the agreement is responsible for resolving in-service issues and will provide details of all mandatory continuing airworthiness information to the validating authority. As is normal practice, the validating authority will review the actions proposed, and by and large they will accept them when they're proposed by the certificating authority. So what we're really saying here is there is an automatic adoption of mandatory continuing airworthiness information, and many of you would have seen CAP 747, and that explains our process of adopting this material unless we make a decision to the contrary. Also, the certificating authority, when asked by the validating authority, will help in determining actions necessary to correct any unsafe conditions that have been identified on the registry of the validating authority. So again, there's a possibility for assistance through this arrangement as well. I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So in the case of failures, malfunctions, defects, other difficulties that may encounter in service, the state of design will perform their normal ICAO obligations. That is to track and evaluate the failures, review incident and accident reports, to work with the type certificate holder to investigate and resolve any identified unsafe condition, to share information with the validating authorities, including copies of any reports that address the corrective actions taken to alleviate the unsafe condition that may be identified, and to make reasonable efforts to resolve issues raised by the validating authority concerning the safety of the products operated in the jurisdiction of the importing parties. So in other words, the state of design will assist the state of registry in addressing any unsafe conditions that may have been identified. Go to the next slide, please. So when we're acting as state of registry, we'll inform the certifying authority, in this case the state of design, of any failures, malfunctions, defects in service difficulties, and any incidents and accidents that occur on the certifying authority's products. And here we are talking about products where the CA is acting as state of design, or EASA is acting as state of design on behalf of the EU member states. We're not talking here about products that we may both have validated, let's say products from the US, because they're addressed under a separate arrangement, in our case, between the UK and the US under our own bilateral agreement and the implementation procedures that go with that agreement. We will, of course, support any investigation of any unsafe conditions and advise the certificating authority if we determined that some immediate action was required to address a safe condition in advance of the certificating authority reaching a conclusion of their own. Can I have the next slide, please? So when we come to mandatory continuing airworthiness information, when either the CA or EASA is acting as state of design, it will of course issue mandatory continuing airworthiness information, typically in the form of an airworthiness directive, but it may not be exclusively that. We'll fulfill our ICAO obligations to identify all known states of registry and pass that information. That, of course, includes the validating authority. We provide the advice to the validating authority on the appropriate action to take when they're considering whether they issue their own MCAI or whether they directly adopt the MCAI produced by the state of design. We both have made an undertaking that we will maintain web-based access to all the MCAI. And you can find that here for the UK in CAP 747 and the associated website where we put things that haven't yet made it into the publication. And for EASA, many of you will already be familiar with the EASA AD publishing tool, and the addresses are there on the screen for those of you who might want a copy of this presentation afterwards. Could we go to the next slide, please? So when we come to alternative methods of compliance with an airworthiness directive, there is a slight difference between the functions that will happen if the CAA has approved the AMOC or whether EASA has approved it. So when EASA acts as a state of design, the alternative method of compliance for a product or a design change that's been automatically accepted by the CA, or will be automatically accepted by the CA, I should say, providing CA has not issued its own AD that deviates in some way from the corresponding EASA AD, because obviously that would affect what was required to fulfill an alternative method of compliance, and thus the mitigation of an unsafe condition. When the CA acts as state of design and issues some alternative method of compliance for a product or for a design change, separate approval is required by EASA. However, EASA will give full consideration to the CAA approved ALTMOC and will not normally look to deviate from those the alternative method of compliance unless there was a significant difference in the standards. Okay, so I think that comes to the end of my session on continuing airworthiness, and I'm going to hand over now, I think it's back to Dominic and Mark, to talk about the administration of design certificates. And as I say, please keep your questions coming in. We're tracking them and we'll go through as many of them as we can in the Q&A session at the end. Thank you. Okay, so over to Dominic, Mark.
Yeah, guys, I've got the short straw on this one, so it's back to Mark. So I'm going to go through section 4 of the tip. You will recognise much of the content as being very typical of tips and IPAs between lots of other different authorities as well. If I step through them, next slide, please. And one more. So going to skip through section 4. So we're going to have a look at the general principles, the transfer of TCs and STCs, their surrender, their revocation stroke suspension, and surrender, withdrawal or change of ownership in the case of a TSOA. Okay, thank you. Next slide. As I said, these general principles are pretty much in line with other tips and IPAs, and they are that the transfers of TCs and STC can only happen when the holder agrees to assume the responsibilities for both the CAA and the EASA TC or STC. Okay. The type design data remains the property of the design approval holder, and the transfer needs to be agreed by both CAA and EASA. And if there's no agreement that can be reached, the certificating authority could revoke the certificate. Next slide, please. So transferring between states. So in this particular case, it's going between the UK and the EU. And in that case, the responsibilities for stated design to comply with ICAO Annex 8 and its responsibilities also transfer. And that transfer will only happen when it's been confirmed in writing by the receiving authority. And the design must meet the receiving authority's own certification requirements for that transfer to happen. Okay, next slide, please. So transfer within the UK or EU without any change in certificating authority. The certificate authority basically notifies the validating authority and will provide a copy of the replacement type certificate or STC, and the validating authority will issue its own corresponding validation STC. Transfer to a third state, well, that's actually out of the scope of the tip, and so it's not discussed any further. Next slide, please. Surrender of a type certificate or STC. The obligation is on the certificating authority to notify the validating authority straight away, and the certificating authority then becomes responsible, will assume the responsibilities for the insurance of continuing airworthiness until such times as there's a new holder found for the type certificate or STC, or the certificating authority has revoked the TC or STC, having first notified the validating authority. That could be in circumstances such as when an unsafe condition is developed and there is no design organization able to develop a solution to resolve that unsafe condition. Next slide. The revocation. Surprise, surprise, the certificating authority must notify the validating authority straight away. Okay, and the validating authority then has a decision to make, and it may either initiate its own revocation or suspension, or can choose to assume continued airworthiness responsibilities within its own jurisdiction. And in that particular case, the original certificating authority will support the validating authority in obtaining any type design data from the former holder. Next slide. Okay, this is the last one, and it's para 4.5, and it regards the surrender, withdrawal, or change of ownership in the UK TSOA or ETSOA. As per Part 21, that transfer can only happen in the case of a change of ownership. In that case, the certificating authority informs the validating authority, and a new validation certificate is issued upon completion of an administrative process. Okay, and then that's a process that Dominic described a little bit earlier. Okay, in the case of surrender or withdrawal, it's similar to what happens for products. Okay, that is the whistle-stop tour of section 4. You will recognize it as being very similar and equivalent to other tips and IPAs, as I said. Any questions, and we'll answer at the end. Thank you.
Okay, and Mike Greer is going to talk to us about production and technical support.
Okay, just wait for the slides coming up. Okay. Yeah, so my name is Michael Greer. I am the production principal, focal point in the UK CAA for production issues, production approvals. Next slide, please. So what we'll talk about today is basically how production is covered in section 5 of the TIP. And unlike the design and certification part of the agreement and the TIP, production was pretty much covered by the agreement itself. So this element of the presentation should be pretty short and sweet, but we will go over some of where we are now and some of the results and activities subsequent to the signing of the agreement, recognition of production and certification systems, a little bit about accepted products, and then another key part of the agreement was recognition of extension where a POA has sites in the other's territory. And finally, a little bit about the interface between POAs and DOAs. So next slide, please. So where we are now, well, the agreement did provide for reciprocal acceptance of the two systems, EASA and the CAA. And these basically were posted on our respective websites, which are on the slides there, and in the EASA website and the CAA website. And the big achievement out of that was basically the acceptance of the production certificates for complete products on a Form 52 and parts and appliances on a Form 1. So a CAA Form 1 and a CAA Form 52 is accepted by EASA, and likewise EASA Form 52 and EASA Form 1 is accepted by the CAA. And Section 5 of the TIP really therefore addresses the CAA and the EASA responsibilities. Unlike the design and certification part of it, there's very little in here other than information for actions for a POA to actually undertake. One of the issues that did come up and continues to generate questions is part marking. So next slide, please. So subpart Q of Part 21 addresses part marking and particularly refers to EPA, European part approval. So the bottom line here with this one is simply, if the design data is approved by the CAA, it'll be, the part marking should be UK PA. And if it design data is approved by EASA, then it will be EPA as per the existing requirements. So any UK design approved after the 1st of January will have UK PA. Any design approved prior to the 1st of January 2021 would have been approved by EASA and therefore will continue to require the markings of EPA. The bottom line with all of this, and it goes right back to when the EPA requirement was introduced, is it does not allow for any deviation from the approved design data. So basically, you do what it says on the tin. If it says EPA on the drawing, you put EPA. If it says UK POA, you put UK POA. If, and I'm sure there are circumstances where that is not correct or recognized, the POA should raise a query with the DOA to get the drawings corrected. Okay, next slide, please. Related to that really is the situation with TSOs, ETSOs or UK TSOs. And again, the part marking requirements for those is pretty much the same as what we've said for general parts. And for equipment approved prior to the 31st of December 2020, and for which the UK POA has a DOPO arrangement, the design data package is accepted for manufacture and therefore can be released on a CA Form 1, similar as to what we've spoken about, that can, if it's an ETSO, a UK POA can manufacture parts or an ETSO and will release it with the appropriate part marking as per the ETSO. If it is a UK TSO authorization, then the part marking requirements will be for UK TSO. There's a caveat in there about changes to those ETSOs. So a UK-based ADOA holding an ETSO cannot now make minor changes to that ETSO. So in effect, the ETSO data is frozen as of the 31st of December 2020. Any changes to that will require a new UK TSO under the UK ADOA. Next slide, please. Moving on, another big achievement out of the agreement was the recognition of each other's certification and production oversight system. And if you go next slide, please. So Appendix 1 of the TIP therefore lists all of those product categories where there is mutual acceptance. So on this slide, there's list 1 and list 2 in Appendix 1, which is broken down into EASA accepted categories and UK accepted categories. And for example, on this slide, you can see sail planes and powered sail planes is in orange text there. So that is EASA only. Light sport aeroplanes, EASA only, because the CAA, we have no capability as of the 31st of December for producing and issuing certificates for those types. Significantly large airplanes, small and large rotorcraft. So the elements in blue are where it's mutually, where there's reciprocal acceptance. And significantly for most of the POAs in the UK, we have only 2-3 type certificate holders now. At the very end there, it's parts and appliances for any category of product. So obviously, although the CAA doesn't have a capability for issuing Form 52s for large aircraft at the minute, POAs can continue to release parts against Part 25 aircraft. Next slide, please. Some of the categories which are in the pipeline but not yet recognized by either party In the UK, we've got hybrid air vehicles, and the type certification basis for that is currently being established. So hybrid airships, drones, or RPAS is also very active at the minute, but is not yet recognized by either category. And another very active sort of development in the pipeline is for electric engines. And of course, there may be others, but just for examples of those which are not yet accepted by each other or as of the 31st of December. Next slide, please. So, assessment of the new category of civil aeronautical product is covered by paragraph 5.2. And if we were to introduce, for example, hybrid air vehicles in the UK, EASA then will have to assess the CAA system for approval of that, and before they would accept that import of that product into EASA, and vice versa the other way. The assessment of that capability would likely also include a visit, at least one visit to the production organization manufacturing that product. And of course, when we get that that assessment is satisfactorily undertaken and the importing party accepts it, then the appropriate list will be updated in Appendix 1 of the TIP. Next slide, please. This particular paragraph, although it says interface between the production approval holder and the design certificate holder, it really relates to authority interaction, and particularly the cases, it only applies to products, and particularly the cases where the state of design is different from the state of manufacture. So, as I said, products, that's complete aircraft engines and propellers only, and it's a requirement in accordance with ICAO requirements, particularly Annex 8. The only activity where there is this split, which we are aware of at the moment, in which the working arrangement is being produced and is practically complete, is for Rolls-Royce engines, which the state of design is EASA, and the state of manufacture, the POA, is in the UK. Next slide, please. Moving on then, although this particular issue, the parts and appliances, is not included in the TIP, we have introduced a little bit of a slide here just to remind those POA holders and DOA holders who have entered into arrangements that those arrangements, while they are acceptable currently, they are time bound in the respect that the arrangements should be updated at the next suitable opportunity to update those references either to the CAA or more likely to EASA for CAA POAs. So as I say, that we have said that can be at the next routine amendment, but probably when those arrangements should be reviewed very frequently, at least once a year or once in the reporting cycle, should be captured certainly within the next year, if not done already. Next slide, please. Okay, so that concludes the parts on production. Hopefully that was clear, and as Neil said, any questions, please post them and we can answer them in the Q&A session later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So as we're making quite good time, I think we have plenty of time for Q&A today. Perhaps we could just move on to section 6, please. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about export certificates and how this has changed now that the UK is no longer part of the EU, and what the new arrangements are. And it picks up on some of the things that Michael's already said. Have the next slide, please. Okay, so section 6 of the tip addresses the documents required for the export of civil aeronautical products between the UK and the EU, and civil aeronautical products mean whole aircraft engines, propellers, and the component parts. So covers pretty much everything. For new aircraft, one of the unique aspects of this bilateral arrangement is that the CAA and EASA will accept each other's Form 52 certificates of conformity for a new aircraft. This is unusual because in other systems, an export certificate of airworthiness is normally required as well. But because our systems at this point in time are pretty much 100% aligned in terms of standards, we are both accepting the Form 52 as an acceptable transfer document. For complete used aircraft, there is a change, and of course that is that an export C of A will be required. That need to be issued either by the CAA if an aircraft is being exported to an EU state, or if it's going to be imported from the EU to the UK. So previously it was possible to transfer an aircraft as long as it had a valid certificate of airworthiness and airworthiness review certificate, and that there was confirmation it had been deregistered in the previous state. So this is a change. So for new products, parts, and appliances that are not complete aircraft, then both the CAA and the EASA Form 1 are acceptable, whether that's inbound to us, so we will accept the EASA Form 1, or the CAA or a CAA approved organisation exporting their products to the European Union, the CAA Form 1 is acceptable. So this now completes the set of major airworthiness authorities in the world that are accepting the CAA Form 1 for new parts. Hence the reason there's no need to hold duplicated production organisation approvals. If you go to the next slide, please. Okay, so for export certificates in the form of Form 52, the exporting party will, of course, certify that the aircraft conforms to a type design approved by the importing party, that the aircraft is in a condition for safe operation, it's been satisfactorily flight tested, and meets any additional requirements prescribed by the importing party. And we come to those later in this section of my presentation. And of course, Form 52 has been provided confirming conformity with that type design. Next slide, please. So if it's anything other than a complete aircraft, then the exporting party, through the issue of a CA Form 1, hold on, can you go back, please? Yeah, will certify that the aircraft conforms to the design data approved by the importing party. Obviously, that the item is a condition for safe operation and it meets any additional requirements that may be prescribed for import. Go to 6.3 now, please. Thank you. Okay, so for a used aircraft, first of all, the aircraft has to be eligible for that there is a type certificate or restricted type certificate in place, and that there is a type certificate holder supporting those certificates. Okay, so if we've got an aircraft that is an orphan, then it's not eligible for an export C of A under the processes described in the tip. So the competent authority of the importing party may request an inspection and to inspect the records to verify work's being accomplished in line with what would be acceptable approved data in the importing state. Where there have been major design changes or supplemental type certificates applied to the aircraft, that they've been properly embodied and that the required data is available to support the continued airworthiness of those design changes. And if there are any non-compliances with the tip, the type design, or any of the requirements of the importing party, they've been identified as exceptions on the export C of A and have been accepted by the importing party before the import takes place. So these processes I've just described here are, I would say, the normal international protocols on the exchange of moving an aircraft from one register to another. In other words, you show compliance with the importing party's requirements, and if for any reason there's something that's not compliant, then that is agreed in advance and is addressed before the new certificate of airworthiness in the importing party's jurisdiction is issued. Okay, next slide, please. So, identification and marking requirements. I think Mike covered this a little bit, but civil aeronautical products to be exported to the European Union will be identified in line with the requirements in Part 21, Subpart Q, and any parts to be exported to the UK will be identified in line with the UK Part 21, Subpart Q, and as those two are identical at the moment, should be no problems with part marking. Manuals, placards, listings, etc. will be presented in English, or if you're exporting to the UK, possibly in one of the other official languages of the EU, and that would be whatever was acceptable to the state of registry. I think this mostly concerns whole aircraft, where sometimes placards are produced in several different languages. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so just to cover additional requirements for imports. The instructions for continued airworthiness and the maintenance manuals must be available for the product being imported, along with, as I said earlier, that it's been certificated or validated in the importing party's system. That the flight manuals and all applicable supplements, including the weight and balance report and equipment list, are available. The logbooks are available and on hand. And the information needed to complete a noise certificate, that's a CA or EASA Form 45, is provided to ensure that if there has been any changes from the basic aircraft's configuration when it was initially certificated, that they can correctly identify the acoustic configuration for the aircraft and therefore enter the right data into the noise certificate. There is one other thing I would say. It's not covered in the tip at this time, and this is because it's subject to some further discussion with our colleagues in EASA, but there are several items in CA CAP 747 that we normally ask the applicant to provide information to assure us of compliance. These are in the generic requirements section of CAP 747, or for some older imported products, there may also be some airworthiness directives that are in force in the UK system that were not necessarily enforced in the EASA system. But as I say, we ask the applicant to provide that information rather than the exporting authority. Okay, I think that's the end of this section. Is there one more slide yet? No, that's it. That's the end of section 6. We're probably about half an hour ahead of time now, so I think we move into another break. And I'm just looking to my colleagues to give me a steer. Are we going to stop for 10 minutes now? Time to get a brew.
Whatever you
Neil,
think.
Neil, that sounds good. The only thing I've asked for is obviously if we're running ahead, I've got to dip out for another call. So just a heads up when you need me back, if possible, please. Okay, that's fine. Yeah. Okay, so let's call it 1:30 now. So back at 22, please. That's time for everyone to get a cup of tea and catch up with any messages, etc. And we continue on from there. Thank you, guys.
Okay, hopefully you can see and hear me. It's Michael Greer again. I have been elected to present on behalf of Dominic and Mark for this session, because it's a pretty brief session and just want to keep I suppose the presenting consistent rather than flip-flopping from one to the other. So on to the next slide, please. Okay, so what does section 7 include? Well, it's just general rules and requirements around how the CAA and EASA will interact, and the type of some of the other types of activities not previously mentioned that we will interact with. Got things like test witnessing, conformity inspections, and there's a little bit more about the extension of a production approval that we referred to in section 5. So next slide, please. So as I didn't, Mark wrote these slides, so I'll just go through them quite rigorously then. So it says section 7 of the TIP addresses the technical assistance between EASA and CAA, and the general principles apply. Every effort is made to have the certification, validation, and production tasks performed locally and on each other's behalf. So if we've got activity being carried out in the UK by an EASA, on behalf of an EASA approved DOA or POA, then it makes sense that we, the CAA, will conduct that locally, and of course vice versa. Importantly, costs are covered by the organizations, and when we are assisting each other, we will use our own procedures where applicable. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, one of the areas where we do tend to help each other on previous bases, for example, with the FAA, is when we are requested to witness tests during a design approval. So the important point to note here is that it is between the CAA and EASA. So although it may be on behalf of a DOA's certification activity, the request will come from, if that's an EASA certification activity, the request will come from EASA to the CAA, and requests directly from manufacturers to the validating authority are not accepted. Where these can be long-term and complex, then we might come up with a working arrangement to establish the requirements and the procedures for that. And we have time limits where when we have requested some activity on the other's territory, the data must be provided at least 2 weeks in advance, which of course we would hope to have it well in advance of that. For findings of compliance, the CAA EASA may request that specific compliance determinations be made for these associated with the witnessing of tests. And once those tests are conducted and accepted, then the confirmation of that compliance is sent back to the requesting authority. Next slide, please. Similarly to test witnessing, we've got conformity certifications, when we've got prototype parts being manufactured and determining the conformity of those prototype parts. Similar restrictions apply for applications directly from manufacturers, limited to complex cases, and similar arrangements, working arrangements may be developed. These conformity inspections may be carried out by accredited persons or approved organizations. So therefore, if EASA were to request us, the CAA, to undertake some conformity inspections, we would be able to delegate that conformity inspection to an approved organization, to a DOA, or more than likely a POA. And it's likely that a CAA surveyor or representative would go down sometimes and witness that, but not necessarily required. Any non-conformities reported, of course, as required, and a little statement just to say that these do not constitute an export approval or airworthiness determination. That is still up to the responsible authority. That responsibility is still with the requesting authority. So next slide, please. So in section 0.7 and 7.1 in particular, there's a list of the TIP. There's a list of activities which one authority may request the other authority to conduct on its behalf. It does, and for production in particularly, it does reference activities such as first article inspections, just ordinary sample inspections on production parts, and even auditing of the POA's quality system. And there's a few more other ones in there as well. So next slide, please. 7.5 was developed to build on the 7.1 requirements and provide a framework for where a more structured relationship between the two authorities is required and expected. And it's where that activity is not just going to be a one-off exercise, but will be long-term, such as when one POA in one territory has sites in the other territory. And this particular paragraph does allow for arrangements and procedures to be developed, so to determine or to manage that when it's over a long time, when it's a long-term exercise. Importantly, of course, the level of participation is mutually agreed between the authorities, and it could include one authority asking the other to carry out surveillance activity on its behalf, to attend as an observer, or even for nothing. So the key one, I think, is where there's surveillance activity carried out by one party on the other party's behalf, where we've got long-term activities in each other's territory, and we can arrange through the procedures or come up with a working arrangement or memorandum of understanding or something similar to establish those arrangements. Next slide, please. Okay, a little bit then just on the legal requirements on underwriting the protection of course, data which is submitted to either authority, and of course that data will be protected by law, and the proprietary data will not be copied, released, or shown without the written consent of the data owner, usually the applicant. And a written consent will be sought if there's any public data request for that information. And lastly, I believe it is when we have accidents investigation or investigations into suspect unapproved parts. Of course, each authority can ask the other authority to carry out those investigations on its behalf, as would be the case with other BASs and technical implementation procedures. So I think that's that, but next slide, please. Yeah. So that was quite short and sweet. And please, I think we're back into questions and answers now. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. So just while Liam readies himself, let me introduce you to Liam Betts. Liam manages the design certification team, and he's going to be our question master for today. Thank you for all the questions that you've been putting in the Q&A box. I'm going to hand over to Liam, and he'll lead us through them. Hopefully we can provide you with an answer to most of these things. If we can't, we will take it away and give you an answer after the session. So without any further ado, here's Liam.
Great, thank you, Neil. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll take you through the Q&As. Thanks for those that have come in. As Neil says, any that we can't answer, we'll try and do so after the event. First one I've got here, I think probably is for yourself, Michael. So what evidence does a CAA POA need to receive from the EASA DOA, along with a statement of approved design data, to be confident that the EASA STC is accepted by the UK CAA due to being non-significant?
Okay, well, I think it's a good question, but I think generally when a production organisation is, in this case, a UK production organisation would be manufacturing to EASA approved design data. And so therefore, I would expect something to be in the DO-PO arrangement between those, the DO and the PO. So in effect, to answer the question directly, there's nothing really required supplementary other than, of course, if it was to be installed, if that product was to be installed on a UK product, by a UK airline, for example, they would have to have evidence of that validation. So I would say that just within the DO-PO arrangement about the making sure that the production organisation is in receipt of the latest and all relevant design data, that's how that would be managed, just within the, basically within the already established and usual formats that exist already. Is there anything extra required? Not specifically, because in this case, the production organisation is manufacturing, or in the example case, the production organisation is manufacturing to EASA approved design data. The validation is particularly of interest to the installer, if that makes sense. I'm happy if anybody else wants to add a little bit more to that.
Any more inputs from that before we move on?
I think your last comment, Michael, is the key one. It doesn't affect the manufacture of the part whether the EASA design data is significant or not. It's up to the installer for whom it would be a concern as to whether they could accept that STC or whether they would need a validating certificate for the STC. But when it comes to production, manufacturing in accordance with the EASA approved design data, it has no impact.
Yeah, I think it would be good practice for the POA to make sure that they would be able to deliver the part to their customer, but that's would be through the normal procedures, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point for that, and it also answers, I think, the last question that came in: can a UK POA issue a CA Form 1 for a design issued by an EASA DOA? Yes, that's the whole intention. As Michael has said there, probably a good idea if you knew whether you could ship to the UK, but it's not a specific question for whether you can manufacture it or not. It is a validation question, as Mark Bonnick's just confirmed. So yes, very full answer there.
Thank you, Michael. Mark Bonnick and Mark Barker, thank you. Mark Bonnick, come to you with the next one from Jeremy Lieber. So when is the cert basis for the validation set? Is it at the original application or when validation is applied for?
Okay, I may be looking to my EASA colleagues from assistance here, but generally, the certification basis for validation starts at the point at which the certificating authority had set the certification basis, i.e. on the date of application to the certificating authority. That would be the basis for the validating authority certification basis, subject to the application of any change product rule considerations or special conditions or any additions to that certification basis. Conversely, however, the tip does state that the environmental protection requirements that the validating authority uses are those that are in existence or in effect in the validating authority's jurisdiction on the date of application for the validation to the VA. So two separate ways. Charles, I don't know if I've interpreted that correctly. I think I have.
Well, maybe I could just add to what you've just said, Mark. If you refer to the respective type certificate data sheets for the validation of another authority's TCs, you will see those specific dates identified, the date of application to the certifying authority, and so on, as you described, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Dominic. Dominic, while you're there, another question on TCDS, actually. So what is the CA position on the creation and ongoing management of TCDS documents going forward?
Okay, so we have imported, if you like, all of the EASA TCDSs and published those on the CAA website. Any changes that need to be made to those TCDSs from EASA land, if you like, will need to be applied for under the administration process that I outlined earlier for those changes that affect the TCDS that would be accepted. However, if there are changes that will require validation, significant changes or new TCs, then clearly those would directly lead to the publication of a CAA TCDS with a nice shiny CAA logo on it. And the same would apply for the same TCDSs that we have accepted coming from US, Canada, Brazil, and obviously the UK ones as well. So it will be a process of working through them, Liam, case by case, updating those and publishing them as CA TCDSs to replace the ones that we've already imported.
Thank you, Dominic. Neil, I think a question for you here. So will the UK CA automatically create or mandate EASA generated ADs?
Okay, so our general policy is always to follow the state of design's airworthiness directives. That pathway is all marked out in the front of CAP 747. However, there is the possibility that we may choose to deviate, in which case we would publish that decision and also inform you of the information that we would require you to follow. And where we're talking about following EASA ADs here, we're talking about products where EASA are fulfilling the function of state of design. So if we were talking about a product that came from Canada or the US, we would be looking to adopt the Airworthiness Directive published by the state of design rather than continuing to follow the AD that EASA either adopted or published themselves. Again, just to give a plug to CAP 747, in the front of the document, there are some flow charts that walk you through this process that hopefully will give you clarity if you didn't get it from me now, or if you can't remember this detail in a few days' time. So front of CAP 747, there's some flow charts that explain the AD adoption process. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Dominic, come back to yourself. So when will the VA become involved in LOI? Current requirement is for the CA to be presented with the LOI at initiation of the project. Does this get shared with the VA at the same time?
Okay, so as I think Mark outlined, we follow the LOI principles, and the VA will become involved with the LOI at the time of the application being made to it. Mark, do you have anything that you might want to add to that?
I wonder if Paul is referring to the LOI as in the LOI that is proposed by the design organisation for the certification of a particular project. With regard to the validating authority's LOI, there's the general principles that are in para 2.1 of the tip, which basically says, you know, the performance and experience of the applicant with the validating authority is taken into account when establishing its own LOI. So if you're an organisation that's known to EASA, that would be taken into account.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Thanks, Dominic. Mark, I think another one for you, possibly Neil. So for the validating authority, for the certification basis, it's mentioned that it would be the VA's own standards. Are the UK CA not using the current CSs? Therefore, would the cert basis not be the same?
Okay, at the moment, you're quite right, Kevin, we are using the current CSs that are published by EASA. However, it's not an absolute guarantee that that will continue to be the case, and that there may not be some divergence going forward. So while they're likely to be similar, we'll try not to diverge too much as a matter of principle, I would guess, but there is a potential for that divergence.
And if I might just come in on that one, any changes to these things like certification specifications, if we did choose to deviate, then we'd have to consult on that, and you'd have the opportunity to have your say before we'd be able to adopt that change into our certification specifications. So as Mark says, today they're aligned. However, there is that possibility of deviation into the future, and we would only do that where we thought it was in the interests of safety. Thank you.
you, Mark. Thank you, Neil. A few questions for Chris Street. I think they're of a similar theme. So the first one from Elaine Canning. Does the tip extend to all EU member states and associated members, e.g. Norway?
Thank you. The tip currently extends to all EU member states. That is the case. It does not presently extend to Norway, but that's because we haven't yet signed an agreement with Norway, or an arrangement which allows this to apply to that particular jurisdiction. You'll find that we have reached arrangements with Switzerland and Iceland on this matter. So Norway is an outstanding, we're cognizant that Norway is an outstanding country and we are working on it.
Thank you, Chris. Another one then. Any progress on the arrangement to cover R&O, repair and overhaul, we believe, maintenance we're talking about there, to remove the need for third country approvals?
This is a tricky one because, as you will be aware, in order to create a new maintenance annex, well, in order to create a maintenance possibility, we need an annex. The annex is not there yet. We will keep pushing for one, by all means, because we think it's in interests of both the EU and the UK. However, this is very much a political sphere and may be caught up with that. So I can't say anything more than that we'll try and keep pushing for it.
Thank you, Chris. So Mark, a question for you from Jim Stock. So in Michael Greer's presentation, he mentioned that UK ADOA holders cannot make minor design changes to articles for which they hold the ETSO at the end of the Brexit transition period. Does this mean we would need to apply for a UK TSO every time, for every ETSO article we want to make a minor change? Apologies, I had a ringing in my ear while that was going on.
Short answer is no. As we said in the presentation, minor changes are accepted under the tip, be that at the product level, engines, propellers, and aircraft, or at the TSO level. The assumption being that those minor changes are within the constraints that were agreed as the scope of allowable minor changes at the point that the TSO authorization was given.
Thank you, Mark.
One exception, I do apologise. In the event that the certificate requires an update to add a part number, for example, for a TSO, albeit within a minor change, that would require an application for an administrative update, but it wouldn't be subject to validation itself.
Thank you, Mark. Another question here for our colleague at EASA, Olivier. Can a UK-approved POA issue a UK CA Form 1 for a design issued by an EASA DOA?
Yeah, sure, they can. Yeah, they can issue, I mean, they can release the part with an EASA Form 1, and that would be accepted in the EU. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so one for you, Mark. This is from Alistair Scott. So what about surrendering the validated TC whilst retaining the certified TC? I.e. for a UK TC holder, surrender the EASA TC and retain the CAA TC. Does that notification need to be with the VA direct, or will the process need to be initiated with the CAA?
Hi, Alistair. Yeah, clearly the validating authority would need to know about it if you wish to surrender the TC within their own jurisdiction. But what I would suggest is that that kind of communication should be routed through the certificating authority. And of course, there would be collaboration between the certificating authority and the validating authority to make sure there was clear understanding of any surrender of responsibility.
Thank you, Mark. Another one here for you from Brian Nielsen. If a UK-based Part 21 has developed a design change or repair on component which is covered by an EASA type certificate, which then goes on to require some form of mandatory reporting, MOR, should this be coordinated with the CAA or EASA?
Okay, Brian, I'm going to make the assumption that you're suggesting that something that goes wrong that requires an MOR is related to your design. in which case if it was a UK CAA approved design, even if it was on a EASA product, then the CAA would be responsible for coordinating response to that event.
Thank you, Mark. I think a question here for Michael. Can you clarify EPA or UKPA marking? So the original EASA DOA approved mark with EPA. The DOA is now under CAA DOA control for continuing oversight. Will this still have EPA or will it change to UKPA?
Which question is that one? Who's it from?
It's from Paul Love. It's marked at 313.
330. Let me have a look at it. I'm not seeing it there.
Would you like me to move on to another one, Mike, and you can come.
Just read it out again, please.
Okay, so can you clarify EPA or UKPA marking? So original EASA DOA approved, marked with EPA. The DOA is now under CAA DOA control for continuing oversight. Will this still have EPA or will it change to UKPA?
No, it stays as EPA because that was the original certification basis of the data of the mod. So if the mod was approved by EASA, even though the DOA is now under UK control, it's the certification, not where the certification or who the certification authority was, not where the DOA is situated. So the certificating authority in that case was EASA, so it remains as EPA.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Another one for you from Kevin Lewis around Form 1. So a current issue, EASA DOA for the STC holder, the UK POA for issuing Form 1s. The customer is outside of EASA and the UK CAA, but will accept an EASA STC. However, they will only accept an EASA Form 1, not a UK one. How can we overcome this?
I think that one was answered by Olivier just previously. We have, and Neil will probably come in on this one, we have undertaken many correspondence with those authorities outside of EASA, and we're continuing to engage with them to ensure we get, where possible, acceptance of the CAA Form 1. So I don't know if Neil, if you want to.
Yeah, I'll just expand a little
on that.
Yeah, if you want, Mike. So we've been working mostly through ADS to try and draw up a list of priority countries where you believe some kind of working arrangement or even potentially a BASA would be in the interests of UK business. As we're aware that some states, it isn't a question of whether they will recognise the CA Form 1 or not, it's simply they need to have a formal arrangement in place to be able to do that. So we're working on that. We've also found that some states, it's simply a question of having a dialogue with them to explain what has happened and for them to provide an explanation of how things can fit into their own system. So to give you just perhaps a small example, I think there was a question about exporting parts to operators in Hong Kong some time ago. And of course, actually, Hong Kong have some information that says if the part is recognized by state of design, then, or the release is recognized by the state of design, then it's acceptable to them. So for instance, new parts for Rolls-Royce engines acceptable under existing processes. So we've kind of got a combination of different things going on at the moment. Yes, we are working on some further working arrangements where there's a significant amount of trade and something formal is needed. Where there's simply just an explanation needed, we're happy to engage with those other authorities to help provide that. We're also conscious, I think there was a question here about leasing companies not wanting to accept the EASA form, sorry, a CA Form 1. I think this is just early days stuff, to be quite honest. CA Form 1, as we said, is accepted by all of the major airworthiness authorities globally now. There will be places where it will take some time for that information to filter through. I think it helps very much the clarification that EASA have provided on a number of occasions now about the fact that POA don't issue POAs to third countries where there are bilateral agreements, and that is recognised in the EASA system. The CA Form 1 is recognised in the EASA system. I think all of these things help to spread the word that you can rely on those certificates to demonstrate conformity to appropriate design standards. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Michael, you may have answered this one, so apologies while I was trying to multitask. Let me just find this one. So if a DOA part was previously EASA approved and EPA marked, and then the same part is then used on a UK PA design, does it remain EPA or become UK PA? That's from Chris Baker. Are you there, Michael?
Yeah, I'm on mute, sorry.
Sorry, apologies.
If a DOA part was previously EASA approved and EPA marked, and the same part is then used on a UK PA design, does it remain EPA or become UK PA? Well, what is the certificating mode method for that UK design? If it's a UK STC, then it should be UK PA marked.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm hesitating a little because I am saying that it could throw up some issues, but I think that's the intention. Yeah.
To support you there, Michael, I would agree, and I would say that if the same part is subsequently used on a UK design organisation approved design, then that at that point would become UK PA marked, because the part marking would be aligned with the integration design change, because otherwise parts are only approved under ETSO, in which case EPA and UK PA don't apply anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Mark. Neil, one for you from Simon Taylor. So question for Neil, for the example for the Form 1 explanation, i.e. Hong Kong acceptance, is there a list of who the UKCA has been in discussion with and are willing to publish, including lessors?
Okay, so there isn't a list in the public domain. The main reason for that is ongoing discussions between the CAA and our Department for Transportation, or Department for Transport rather, on prioritisation of this work. But I can tell you it does include countries such as China. It does include the expansion of some of the arrangements that we've already entered into with other states in the Far East. So I can't, as I say, I can't make that list public at this time because we're still discussing this with the Department of Transport. But in the meantime, we are starting to move forward with some of those arrangements, including, as I just mentioned, China, where in fact we have a discussion tomorrow with the Chinese authorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. I'm just looking through, quite a few of these have been answered but haven't cleared from the system, so apologies while I flick through. So I have a question here, production question, so possibly for yourself, Michael. So for a POA in one jurisdiction, can they still have a site in the other jurisdiction and treat that other site as a subcontractor?
Yes, of course. That the rules around subcontracting have not changed whatsoever. the engagement, the tip and the agreement refers to where the POA has a second or additional site as part of their approval in the other's territory. Subcontracting is a completely different activity, and you can have subcontractors managed by, under your POA procedures, practically anywhere in the world. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Michael. Dominic, come to you. So will the CAA publish their own version of CS25, CS23, etc.?
Again, I will look for Neil for support, but I believe that we already have published these standards, or if not, we certainly are close to intending to do so. I know that we've published all the regulations on our website. Neil, can you update on that?
Yeah, sure. So all the CSs and all the AMC that was in place at the end of the year was adopted by a CAA decision at that point in time. What we've been trying to do since then is actually produce UK dedicated versions of these publications. So we're working our way through the AMC at the moment, and we will work our way through the CSs. We're also undertaking a project to look at what's the best way of publishing the information for these rules that we took from the European system and brought across into the UK system. We're looking at several different possibilities at the moment, including the familiar quick access guides, although I think we recognise they may be the tip of this particular iceberg. And so it may be some time before we have everything sitting in a nice new document management system, but we're certainly working on the raw material as we speak. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Olivia, I wonder if you could help us with the question here from Rory King. So if not later in the presentation, please provide any information regarding a DOA to DOA or DOA to POA arrangement between UK and EASA approved organisations.
All right, yeah, so it's pretty simple. We simply ask for an update of the DO-PO arrangement because the DOA has now a new reference, simply because the UK DOA used to have an EASA DOA. Now it has a UK CAA DOA, so it has a new approval number. So we basically ask to have an updated arrangement between the now UK DOA with the EU POA. Now, with that updated agreement, and provided that the data is validated or accepted, then parts can be manufactured and released, and with a UK CAA Form 1 or vice versa with an EASA Form 1 if in the EU, and then it will be accepted in the UK. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you. Mark Barker, are you looking to take the question from Grant Bennett, the one responding to Olivier's response to Kevin Lewis?
I was looking to take the follow-up from Alan, but I will answer to that more. Okay. Yeah, I'll take that. And I'll basically just refer back to Neil Williams's response, which is in several cases, an explanatory letter from the CAA has been sufficient to allow the Form 1 to be accepted. We are pursuing working arrangements and other elements that require more formal elements with certain countries, some of which will require the backing of government, obviously, for us to be able to engage in with those discussions. So we have continued to try to eliminate those barriers as we can. We're not publishing a list as such of those countries that we know are accepting the certificates, because in several cases we've had to go into bat for individual POAs, individual companies exporting particular products. I believe that ADS are keeping a watching brief on this, and we keep in close liaison with ADS on this. I think it's fair to say it is absolutely on the radar. They explaining to the importing countries and the lessors that the Form 1 is fully acceptable and has been accepted now by bilateral treaties and agreements and arrangements with the major external regulators, including the TCA with the EU, is our strongest point. And if we can get them accepted through that route, that is our main focus, but we continue to try to progress the other ones, which may well take a longer period of time. I don't know if Neil wants to come in or just reinforce on that, but that's where we are with that at the moment. And then I'll move on to Alan's question.
Okay. No, Mark, I think you covered the issue pretty well. We're busy working on more arrangements, and we will continue to do that at the speed that we can manage and the speed that's supported by our own government. Thank you. I'll hand back to you, Mark.
Okay, thanks. And the follow-up question from Alan McGowan, which I think is what Michael was asking me to respond to there regarding the issue of an export certificate, competent authority or production approval shall ensure such aeronautical product conforms to a design validated or automatically accepted or validated. The previous answer indicated that that was the installer responsibility, and legally that's correct. It is always at the end of the day the installer of the modification onto the aircraft who carries the final responsibility for checking that that modification or change is eligible for installation on the aircraft that they're fitting it to. To meet the previous paragraph, then we would expect that data, yes, to be checked by the POA. Where they're getting that data from, well, the DOA should have the information as to the extent to which that design can be accepted, and I would expect that information to be contained in the DOA POA arrangement. There's plenty of leeway in the documents associated with that. For example, direct ship authority. If the DOA maintained a list of those jurisdictions where you could and could not ship that part, that would certainly meet that intent within the scope of the arrangements in 21A, 133, 21A4. So as a POA, if I wanted to know where I could release my parts to that would be acceptable, that data has to come down from the DOA. And as Michael's question said, how that data has flowed down is not really defined formally anywhere in these arrangements. I would put it in the DOA POA arrangement and keep it up to date as part of the discussions between the design holder and the production organization wanting to know where they could ship the parts, which hopefully should cover that.
Thank you, Mark. Coming to you, Dominic, next then. So a question from Sam Middlewood. So owing to validation approval process timelines, there'll be short delays between EASA's publication of revised TCDS or CS and the UK CAA publication of the same documentation. During a period where EASA documentation is available at a newer revision, should DOAs continue to reference the current published UK CAA documentation only?
Okay, thank you very much, Sam. Thank you, Liam. Yeah, this is a fairly common query now. Since the 1st of January, a number of EASA TCDSs are being updated, but the ones that should be referenced by UK DOAs are those that were available at the 31st December, and the ones that, as you pointed out, Sam, have been published on the CAA website. They will be updated, and as you say, there will be a slight delay. So if there's any queries about the CAA approval status of a particular TC holder design change, then you can either revert to the TC holder to get confirmation that it has been CAA approved, pending update and reissue of the CAA TCDS, or you can revert and raise the query with ourselves in the design certification team.
Thank you, Dominic. Okay, I think this probably refers to something that you touched on, Mark Barker. So question just coming. So when you say that an installer has the ultimate responsibility, is that the Part 145 or the Part Camo?
I will await to be kicked under the virtual table by Neil, who's far more versed in camo than I am. It's basically whoever's reading the back of the EASA Form 1 or the CAA Form 1 that says it's the installer's responsibility. In my day, it would have been majority the Part 145, but I would believe that overall responsibility would be the Part Camo, who was directing the 145 organization to install the part. But again, if the installer is the 145, they've got the Form 1 and it's saying it on the back, then it's I'd appreciate from Neil confirmation as to exactly, but it's not the 21G. That's the key thing for this conversation. It is in effect the customer that you have supplied that part to, who is about to install it. But Neil, if you'd confirm, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think so. I think you have to look at it from the point of view of the camo would be the one raising the work order with the 145 to perform the work. So there's an obligation on the camo to ensure that their aircraft continues to comply with approved design data. And the 145's obligation is to ensure that they are installing something that is qualified by the appropriate data. So they both share a responsibility, but of course the release to service is the one issued by the 145 at the end of the day. But the operation of the aeroplane remains the responsibility of the camo.
Yep, thanks for that.
Okay, Michael, are you looking to take the question from Trevor about production approvals being accepted for eVTOL aircraft in either or both directions?
As to the best of my ability, I will, unless I don't profess to be an expert in eVTOL, but my recollection is that eVTOL has not been accepted yet by either authority. I don't think it was listed in any of the lists in Appendix 1, so therefore the answer is no, I believe.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
I think that pretty much brings us to the end. If there are no more questions, I appreciate everybody's questions and obviously the panel for answering. So thank you very much. If I can hand back to you, Neil.
Okay, thank you, Liam. So after running a little ahead of schedule, we now kind of back on schedule. So I'm just going to hand over to Dave Malins to wrap up this session, and also to say to you, if there are any questions that you have after this event, please don't hesitate to drop us a line. We're fully expecting that you may have some queries that you come across once you reflect on all the new material that's been presented today and had a chance to read the tip, because it's only been available publicly for a few hours now. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Dave to close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you to all of those that have presented, answered questions this afternoon, and prepared for today, which was a fairly large day, as you can imagine, with the signing of the agreement this morning, the first COB with EASA, and then running an industry session this afternoon. So it's been no mean feat. So thank you all for your contributions. Also, thank you to industry this afternoon as well. I haven't been sat through all of this afternoon, unfortunately, because I had some other commitments, but I have sat through some of it. And I think, it seems to have been very well attended in terms of numbers. And I hope you've all found it useful and a good starting point for future working relationships with the EU. Obviously, from our side, we will be publishing this presentation and the information with it, and I believe we'll also be publishing the videos as well. So should you wish to look back at any of the answers and the Q&As or the presentations, you should be able to find it on our YouTube channel. So really, it just leaves me to say thank you once again to everybody. I hope you found it useful. Please do not be afraid to obviously refer to our website. You've also got contact details for others should you need to contact the team or myself, or there's a blanket email address as well that we will pick up any Q&As. So please enjoy the rest of your day, stay safe, and we look forward to working with you in the not too distant future. Thank you ever so much.